The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any known civilization. It floated in the void between stars, a massive sphere of crystal and metal that could hold representatives from 1,000 different species. On this day, only 47 species had sent their ambassadors. But those 47 controlled everything that mattered in the known. Galaxy Ambassador Daniel Harper stood alone in the center of the chamber. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 20 years building relationships with alien species, learning their languages, understanding their customs. He had believed that patience and goodwill could overcome any difference. Now he understood how wrong he had been. The High Arbiter rose from his throne. His name was Zethkon, and he belonged to a species that looked like giant insects. His body was covered in black armor, and his mouth was filled with sharp mandibles that clicked when he spoke. The translation device in Daniel's ear converted those clicks into words he could understand. "The Council has reached its decision," Zethkon announced. "Humanity has been found guilty of crimes against galactic stability. Your species has expanded too quickly. You have developed technology at a rate that threatens the natural order. You have inspired dangerous ideas among the lower castes of established civilizations. For these crimes, humanity is sentenced to exile." Daniel felt his heart sink, but he kept his face calm. "May I speak in our defense?" "You may speak, but the decision is final." Daniel looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had once called themselves humanity's friends. The Selenari, who looked like tall, gray ghosts with eyes that glowed blue. The Vosk, who resembled lizards walking on two legs. The Kathrani, who were made of living crystal that sang when they moved. All of them stared at him with expressions of fear or contempt. 300 years ago, humanity discovered that we were not alone in the universe, Daniel began. We were frightened at first. Then we were curious. Then we were hopeful. We reached out to every species we encountered with open hands and open hearts. We asked only for the chance to learn and to share what we knew. And that is precisely the problem, hissed Ambassador Vosk. His scales were the color of rust, and his eyes were yellow slits. "Wherever humans go, they bring chaos. Our workers see your freedoms and demand the same. Our traditions are questioned. Our social order is threatened." "We never intended to cause harm," Daniel said. "Intent is irrelevant," Zethkon replied. "Results are what matter. In 3 centuries, your species has accomplished what others required 10,000 years to achieve. This is unnatural. This is dangerous. The Council has determined that humanity must be removed from civilized space before you destabilize everything we have built." The sentence was pronounced. Humanity would be banished to the outer reaches, a vast region of space beyond the borders of the Galactic Council's territory. It was a place of dead stars and barren worlds where no civilization had ever taken root. All trade with humanity would cease. All communication channels would be closed. Any human ship found in Council space would be destroyed without warning. Daniel returned to Earth 3 days later. The journey through faster-than-light corridors that humanity had only recently gained access to felt longer than ever before. He spent most of it staring out the window at the stars. Wondering how he would deliver the news, the United Human Assembly met in New Geneva, a city that had been built specifically to serve as humanity's capital in the age of space travel. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from every nation and colony in human space. They had heard rumors of the Council's verdict, but they waited for official confirmation. Daniel stood before them and spoke the words that would change human history forever. "We have been exiled," he said simply. "The Galactic Council has decided that humanity is too dangerous to remain amongst civilized species. We have 1 year to evacuate all human settlements in Council space. After that, any human found within their borders will be killed." The hall exploded with noise. Some representatives shouted in anger. Others wept. A few demanded immediate war against the Council, but most simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they had heard. President Catherine Cole rose from her seat at the front of the chamber. She was 63 years old, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to look right through anyone she focused on. She had led humanity through 2 major crises already. Now she would face the greatest challenge of all. "Silence," she commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried authority that made everyone stop and listen. I understand your fear. I understand your anger. I share both. But we will not respond to this injustice with chaos. We will respond with purpose. She walked to the center of the stage, standing beside Daniel. The Galactic Council has cast us out because they fear what we might become, she continued. They see our potential, and it terrifies them. They have ruled this galaxy for 100,000 years, and they cannot imagine a future where they are not in control. We represent that future. We represent change. And change frightens those who have grown comfortable with the way things are. Catherine paused, letting her words sink in. We could fight, she said. We could throw ourselves against their fleets and die gloriously in battle. But that would prove nothing except that we are as violent as they claim. Instead, we will do something far more powerful. We will survive. We will thrive. We will build something in the darkness they have banished us to. Something so magnificent that the entire galaxy will have no choice but to take notice. The assembly hall fell completely silent. They want us to disappear. They want us to fade away and be forgotten. But we are humanity. We have faced extinction before. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. We have climbed out of every hole we have ever fallen into, and we will climb out of this one too. The evacuation began within months. 12 billion humans lived in council space, scattered across colonies and space stations and ships. All of them had to be moved to the outer reaches within a single year. It was the largest migration in the history of any species, and it required every resource humanity possessed. Daniel Harper was given command of the colony ship Meridian, one of 10,000 vessels that would carry humanity into exile. On the day of departure, he stood on the bridge and watched as the lights of known space faded behind them. Beside him stood his young aide, Lisa Grant, a woman who had been born on a colony world and had never seen Earth. What happens now? She asked quietly. Daniel thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about all the hopes that had been crushed, all the bridges that had been burned, all the futures that had been stolen. Then he thought about President Cole's words and the fire he had seen in her eyes. Now we show them who we really are, he said. Now we build something new. The fleet crossed the boundary into the outer reaches as the stars of the Galactic Council disappeared behind them. Ahead lay only darkness and the unknown. But Daniel Harper was not afraid. He had seen what humanity could accomplish when pushed to the edge. The Council had made a terrible mistake. They had created an enemy where they could have had a friend, and one day it would understand exactly how grave that error had been. The first 5 years in the outer reaches were the hardest humanity had ever faced. 3 colony ships were destroyed when they flew into asteroid fields that no map had ever recorded. 2 more suffered engine failures that left thousands of people stranded in the cold emptiness of space, waiting for rescue that came too late. Disease spread through the crowded ships like wildfire, killing tens of thousands before doctors could develop treatments. Food ran out faster than anyone had predicted. The rationing system that President Cole had established barely kept people alive. Fights broke out in the food lines. Riots erupted on several ships. For a brief and terrible period, it seemed like humanity might tear itself apart before the outer reaches could kill them. Admiral Samuel Cross saved them. He was a military man who had served under President Cole for decades. He understood that survival required organization above all else. He reorganized the entire fleet into mobile colonies, groups of ships that could operate independently but remained connected through communication networks. When one colony found resources, they shared with the others. When one colony faced disaster, the others sent help. The system was not perfect, but it worked. Humanity stopped dying quite so quickly. They began to adapt. The first permanent settlement was built on a frozen moon that the colonists named Haven. It was a terrible place by any normal standard. The surface temperature was cold enough to freeze a person solid in minutes. The atmosphere was made of gases that would kill any human who breathed them. There was no liquid water anywhere on the surface. Dr. Patricia Webb looked at this frozen wasteland and saw a possibility. She was a terraforming engineer, one of the best humanity had ever produced. She had spent her career developing technologies to transform hostile worlds into places where people could live. Now she would put those technologies to the ultimate test. Her new atmospheric processors were a miracle of engineering. They could convert poisonous gases into breathable air 10 times faster than anything that had existed before. Within 5 years, small domes appeared on Haven's surface, where people could walk without suits. Within 10 years, those domes had grown into a city of 500,000 people. Other settlements followed Haven's example. Verdant was built in the hollow core of a massive asteroid, its interior transformed into a green paradise of farms and forests. Ironhold was carved into the side of a dead volcano on a world of black rock and red dust. New Providence floated in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, a city of balloons and platforms that harvested fuel from the clouds. Below, each settlement solved problems that had never been solved before. Each one proved that humanity could adapt to conditions that would have killed any other species. The children born in these places grew up knowing nothing of Earth except stories. They were shorter than their grandparents because of the different gravity. Their eyes were better adapted to artificial light. Their lungs processed recycled air more efficiently. They were becoming something new. Nathan Park was one of these children. He was born on Haven in the 3rd year of exile, and he showed unusual intelligence from an early age. By the time he was 15, he was studying advanced physics. By 20, he had designed a new type of engine that made ships twice as fast. By 25, he had created mining vessels that could extract valuable minerals from gas giants, something that no species in the Galactic Council had ever achieved. His sister Michelle followed a different path. She became a doctor and developed medical technologies that extended human lifespan by decades. People who should have died of old age remained healthy and active well into their 2nd century of life. Patricia Webb herself benefited from this technology, remaining sharp and vital at an age when her grandparents would have been long dead, but humanity's progress attracted attention from the darkness. The Scourge arrived in the 20th year of exile. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They were biomechanical nightmares, creatures made of flesh and metal that consumed everything in their path. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply destroyed. 3 human colonies fell before anyone understood the threat. The Scourge swept through the settlements like a plague, leaving nothing but empty buildings and scattered bones. Distress calls went unanswered because help arrived too late. By the time rescue ships reached the colonies, there was nothing left to rescue. Admiral Cross rallied the defense fleet. He was an old man now, his hair white and his body frail, but his mind remained sharp. He gathered every warship humanity possessed and led them to New Providence, where the Scourge were massing for their next attack. The battle lasted 3 days. Human ships fought with desperate courage, but their weapons had been designed for protection against pirates and accidents. It's not warfare against an enemy that could heal faster than it could be damaged. The Scourge absorbed missile strikes and kept coming. They shrugged off energy beams and continued their advance. Admiral Cross went down with his flagship, the Endeavor. He stayed on the bridge until the end, directing the evacuation of civilian ships while his vessel burned around him. His last transmission was a simple order to his crew: save the people. Then the signal cut off, and the Endeavor broke apart. The survivors retreated to Haven, where Commander Rachel Bennett took charge of the defense. She was the daughter of scientists who had died in the early years of exile, and she had grown up with a fierce determination to protect her people. Now she faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Rachel refused to accept defeat. She proposed a plan that seemed insane to everyone who heard it. Capture a living Scourge. Study it. Find its weakness. Build weapons specifically designed to destroy it. The capture mission was a nightmare. 200 soldiers died getting a single juvenile Scourge into a containment unit. The research that followed cost 50 more lives when the creature briefly escaped and rampaged through the laboratory. But Dr. Marcus Webb, Patricia's son, finally discovered the truth. The Scourge were vulnerable to a specific type of radiation, one that could be generated by modifying the lasers used in mining operations. Rachel led the counterattack personally. The human fleet returned to New Providence with weapons that had never existed before. When the modified lasers struck the scourge, the creatures did not heal. They burned. They died. And for the first time since the nightmare began, humanity won. The second battle for New Providence was over in hours. The scourge swarm that had seemed invincible was reduced to drifting ash and cooling metal. Human soldiers walked through the wreckage in stunned silence. Unable to believe what they had accomplished, word of the victory spread through every settlement in the outer reaches. People who had lived in fear for months finally allowed themselves to hope again. The humans had faced extinction and survived. They had looked into the darkness and refused to be consumed by it. Rachel Bennett stood on the bridge of her ship and looked out at the stars. Behind her, the celebrations were already beginning. People were laughing and crying and holding each other, releasing the terror they had carried for so long, but Rachel was not celebrating. She was thinking about what came next. The scourge had been defeated, but they had proven something important. The outer reaches were not safe. The darkness held dangers that humanity had never imagined. If they wanted to survive, they would need to become stronger, smarter, better prepared for whatever came next. The wilderness years had forged humanity into something new. Now that new humanity would begin to build its future, 40 years after the exile began, the outer reaches had become something that no one could have predicted. What had once been a prison of dead stars and empty worlds was now home to 37 thriving planets and over 400 space stations. Trade routes connected settlements that spanned thousands of light years. Schools trained children who had never known any home but the darkness. Shipyards produced vessels more advanced than anything the Galactic Council possessed. The Terran Confederation, as it now called itself, had become a civilization. Chancellor Patricia Webb governed from her office in Haven City, the place she had helped build from frozen rock and poisonous air. She was over 100 years old now, kept alive and healthy by the medical technologies her work had inspired. Sometimes she felt like a relic from another age, a living reminder of the suffering that had made this prosperity possible. But whenever she looked out at the city lights stretching to the horizon, she remembered why she continued. The discovery that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Nathan Park had spent decades studying strange energy readings at the edge of Confederation territory. The signals were faint and irregular, easy to dismiss as natural phenomena. But Nathan had never been satisfied with easy explanations. He gathered a fleet of research vessels and set out to find the source. What he found was impossible. The gateway was a ring of metal and crystal, floating in empty space, large enough for 100 ships to pass through at once. It was millions of years old, built by a civilization that had existed long before the Galactic Council was formed. And it was still active. Nathan sent a probe through the gateway and watched in amazement as it emerged in a star system on the other side of the galaxy. The journey that should have taken centuries had happened in an instant. More importantly, there was another gateway waiting on the other side. It's not just a portal, Nathan explained to the Science Council when he returned. It's a network. There are hundreds of these gateways scattered across the galaxy, maybe thousands. Whoever built them had technology we can barely understand. They connected the entire universe. The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent 40 years building a civilization in the outer reaches, carving a home from hostile worlds through determination and sacrifice. Now they had access to territory that dwarfed everything they had accomplished. Empty star systems full of resources waited on the other side of the gateways, free for the taking. But the Confederation was not alone in the gateway network. The Vectari were the first species they encountered. They were beings made of living crystal, their bodies shifting and changing as light passed through them. They communicated through patterns of color and sound that took human scientists years to decipher. They had been wandering the gateway network for thousands of years, refugees from a catastrophe they refused to discuss. Ambassador Sophie Chen led the diplomatic mission to make contact with the Vectari. She was Daniel Harper's student, trained by the man who had represented humanity before the Galactic Council so long ago. Daniel was dead now, but his teachings lived on in Sophie. She approached the Vectari with the same patience and respect that Daniel had shown to the aliens who eventually betrayed humanity. This time, the approach worked. The Vectari were cautious at first, but Sophie's persistence won them over. After 3 years of careful negotiation, they agreed to share their knowledge with humanity, and what they knew changed everything. They called themselves the Architects, Sophie reported to the Confederation Assembly. They built the gateways millions of years ago to connect the galaxy. Their civilization spanned more worlds than we can count. They wanted to bring all intelligent species together in peace and cooperation. Chancellor Webb leaned forward in her chair. What happened to them? Sophie hesitated before answering. The Vectari don't know exactly, or maybe they do know, Anne. D are afraid to tell us. Something destroyed the Architects. Something that came from the deep void between galaxies. The Vectari call them the Void Singers, and they believe that whatever destroyed the Architects is still out there, waiting. The Confederation debated for months about how to respond. Some leaders wanted to seal the gateways and focus on protecting their existing territory. Others argued for aggressive expansion, gathering resources and knowledge before the Void Singers could threaten them. The discussion went round and round without resolution. In the end, it was a young commander named Jason Cole who broke the deadlock. He was the great-great-grandson of Catherine Cole, the president who had led humanity into exile. He had inherited her determination and her ability to inspire others with words. Jason stood before the assembly and spoke from his heart. Ancestors were cast out because the galaxy feared what we might become. For 40 years, we have proven that fear was justified, but not in the way anyone expected. We did not become conquerors. We did not become destroyers. We became survivors, builders, innovators. Now the galaxy opens before us again, and we must decide who we want to be. He paused, looking around at the faces of leaders who had spent their lives struggling to survive. Do we hide in the shadows because we are afraid of what might be waiting in the darkness? Or do we step forward and become what we were always meant to be? I say we explore. I say we learn. I say we prepare ourselves for whatever is coming. Because if the Void Singers are real, they will find us eventually, whether we hide or not. And when they do, I want humanity to be ready.
Oh, the vote was unanimous.
The Terran Confederation would become the Terran Empire, not an empire of conquest, but an empire of exploration and growth. Jason Cole was named Admiral of the Fleet, Sophie Chen became Foreign Minister, and Nathan Park, now an old man who had spent his entire life pushing the boundaries of science, became Minister of Technology. The expansion that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human explorers traveled through gateway after gateway, mapping star systems and cataloging resources. They found worlds of impossible beauty and worlds of terrible danger. They encountered species that the Galactic Council had never discovered, some friendly and some hostile. New alliances were formed. The Vectari became humanity's closest partners, sharing knowledge that had been accumulated over millennia of wandering. Other species joined the Empire voluntarily, drawn by promises of protection and prosperity. The humans did not force anyone to join them. They simply offered something better than what existed before. 20 years after the discovery of the gateways, Terran Empire controlled more territory than the Galactic Council itself. Their technology had advanced beyond anything the Council species could match. Their population had grown to tens of billions, spread across hundreds of worlds, and in the quiet moments between crises and celebrations, the leaders of the Empire looked toward the deep void and wondered when the darkness would finally come for them. Sophie Chen stood at her office window on Haven, watching ships come and go from the orbital stations above. She was old now, her hair white, and her face lined with the marks of a life spent in service to her people. But her eyes were still sharp, and her mind still active. Jason Cole entered the room behind her. He was middle-aged now, a seasoned leader who had guided the Empire through its greatest period of growth. "The Council is getting nervous," he said. "Our expansion is making them afraid." Sophie nodded slowly. "They cast us out because they feared what we might become. Now they see that fear becoming reality. What do we do?" Sophie turned to face him, a slight smile on her weathered face. "We keep building. We keep preparing. And when the time comes, we show them that there is nothing to fear from humanity. We are not their enemies. We never were." Jason considered her words. And the Void Singers? When they come, we will be ready, and the galaxy will need us. The rising was complete. What came next would determine whether humanity's story ended in triumph or tragedy. 75. Years after humanity was banished from civilized space, the Galactic Council faced a crisis that threatened to destroy everything they had built over 100,000 years. The plague appeared on the homeworld of the Selenari Collective, the gray-skinned species whose representative had been among the loudest voices calling for humanity's exile. No one knew where the disease came from or how it spread so quickly. Within months, it had killed hundreds of millions. Within a year, billions were dead. And the plague showed no signs of stopping. Selenari doctors worked desperately to find a cure. They tried every treatment their advanced medicine could offer. Nothing worked. The plague adapted to every drug they developed, evolving faster than their technology could keep up. It was as if the disease had been specifically designed to destroy them. High Arbiter Morven called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. He was the grandson of Zethkon, the Arbiter who had pronounced humanity's sentence of exile so long ago. Unlike his grandfather, Morven had always harbored doubts about that decision. Now those doubts had become certainties. The council chamber was filled with fear. Representatives from dozens of species listened as Morven described the situation. The Selenari would be extinct within a generation unless a cure was found. And none of the council species had the medical technology to develop one. We have tried everything, Morvan admitted. Our scientists have failed. Our doctors have failed. If anyone in this chamber has a solution, I beg you to share it. Silence filled the great hall. No one had answers. No one had hope. Then the transmission arrived. It came through communication channels that it's been silent for 75 years, carrying a symbol that most council members had tried to forget. The blue sphere of Earth surrounded by an upward-pointing arrow. The mark of humanity. The Terran Empire offers assistance to the Selenari Collective, the message said. Our medical technology has advanced far beyond what we possessed when we left your space. We believe we can develop a cure for the plague. All we ask in return is the opportunity to speak with you as equals. The council erupted in chaos. Some representatives demanded that the message be ignored, arguing that humanity must be planning some kind of revenge. Others pointed out that without human help, the Selenari would die. A few even suggested that humans had created the plague themselves as a weapon. Morvan silenced them with a gesture. I will meet with them personally, he announced. If they intend to harm us, let them demonstrate it directly. If they intend to help, let us not be too proud to accept their assistance. The meeting took place on a space station at the border between Council territory and the outer reaches. Morvan arrived with 50 advisors and a fleet of warships. The humans arrived with a single ship and 12 crew members. Foreign Minister Sophie Chen led the human delegation. She was in her 90s now, her hair completely white and her body frail. But her voice remained strong, and her eyes held the fire of a lifetime spent fighting for her people. You exiled us because you feared what we might become, she said to Morvan across the negotiating table. You were not wrong to be afraid. We have become something extraordinary in the darkness you sent us to. But we have not become your enemies. We have become something better. We have become your op. Opportunity. Morvan studied the old woman carefully. He had expected arrogance or anger. He found neither. Why would you help us? After what we did to your people, after the suffering we caused, why would you offer mercy? Sophie smiled gently. Because that is who we chose to be. We could have become bitter. We could have spent these 75 years planning revenge. The darkness was deep enough to swallow any soul. But we decided to remember the best of what we were, and to become something even better. The cure was delivered within a month. Dr. Michelle Park, the Surgeon General of the Terran Empire, developed it years earlier, when intelligence reports first revealed the plague's existence. She had anticipated that the Council might eventually need human help. The treatment required no payment, no political concessions. Humanity gave it freely, as proof of what they had become. The Selenari recovered. Word spread throughout the council of the species that had been cast out as dangerous and returned as saviors. Other species began reaching out to the Empire. The Vosk, who had once called humanity a poison, found their own worlds threatened by the scourge. The same creatures that had nearly destroyed humanity in the early years of exile had finally reached Council space. Admiral Jason Cole led a combined fleet to defend the Vosk homeworld. The battle was swift and brutal. Human weapons, refined through decades of fighting the scourge, cut through the enemy like fire through paper. Tactics that Council military commanders had never imagined proved devastatingly effective. When the fighting ended, the Vosk ambassador approached Jason Cole with tears streaming down his scaled face. "We called your people poison," he said. "We voted for your exile. How can you defend us after what we did?" Jason looked at the alien who had once been humanity's enemy. "Because defending the innocent is who we are. The sins of the past are paid for through the actions of the present. Today, you needed help. Tomorrow, someone else will need help, and we will be there." Trade negotiations followed the military alliance. Cultural exchanges began between species that had never spoken before. Scientific collaboration produced technologies that neither side could have developed alone. One by one, the species that had voted for humanity's exile reconsidered their judgment. Morvan requested a private meeting with Sophie Chen as the reconciliation process neared completion. "Must ask you something," he said. "Something that has troubled me since this began. My grandfather sentenced your people to exile. He believed he was protecting the galaxy from a threat. Now I see that he was wrong. But I need to understand. Why did you not simply let us die? After everything we did, why show mercy?" Sophie considered the question for a long moment. Through the window of the meeting room, she could see the lights of human and alien ships moving together in formation. A sight that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. "Because revenge would have made us less than what we are," she finally said. "Anyone can hate. Anyone can destroy. Building something better requires courage. Forgiveness requires strength. We spent 75 years in darkness, and we had plenty of time to think about what kind of people we wanted to be. We chose to be the kind of people who offer help when it is needed, regardless of history." Morvan bowed his head. "Then we were right to fear you. But we were wrong about why. You are not dangerous because of your technology or your ambition. You are dangerous because you are better than us. And that is something we never anticipated." The Terran Empire was formally invited to rejoin the Galactic Council. Exactly 75 years after humanity's exile began, the ceremony took place in the same great hall where Daniel Harper had received the sentence of banishment. Sophie Chen stood in the spot where he had stood, addressing the representatives of every species in known space. "We accept your invitation," she said, "not as returning exiles, but as equals. Not as supplicants seeking forgiveness, but as partners offering friendship. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders and dangers. Let us face them together." The vote to admit humanity was unanimous. When it was announced, the chamber filled with sounds that humans had never heard before. The Selenari singing in their ghostly voices, the Vosk clicking their claws in approval, the Kathrani ringing like bells. Even the insectoid species that resembled the old arbiters joined in the celebration. Sophie Chen watched the celebration with tears in her eyes. She thought of Daniel Harper, who had stood in this very spot and received humanity's sentence of death. She thought of Catherine Cole, who had led her people into darkness with nothing but hope to guide them. She thought of all the men and women who had sacrificed everything so that this moment could happen. They had been cast out as threats. They had returned as saviors, and the galaxy would never be the same. 100 years after the exile, humanity stood at the center of galactic civilization. What had begun as a punishment had become a blessing. What had been intended to destroy them had made them stronger than anyone could have imagined. The Terran Empire now included 200 worlds and countless space stations. 15 trillion souls called it home, a mix of humans and dozens of alien species, who had chosen to join under the protection of the people who had once been cast out as dangerous. Human doctors served in hospitals across 1,000 planets. Human engineers built infrastructure that transformed barren rocks into paradise. Human diplomats resolved conflicts that had festered for millennia. Emperor Marcus Cole ruled from Earth, the homeworld that humanity had reclaimed decades earlier. He was the great-great-grandson of Catherine Cole, the president who had led humanity into exile. Like his ancestor, he preferred the title of steward to emperor. He believed that true power came from service, not domination. But even as humanity celebrated its triumphs, darkness was gathering at the edges of known space. The first warning signs came from the deepest parts of the Gateway Network, where human explorers had ventured further than any species before them. Expedition after expedition vanished without sending back reports. Probes sent to investigate returned corrupted with strange data or did not return at all. Something was moving in the void, something that had been sleeping for millions of years. Admiral Sarah Cole, the Emperor's sister and commander of the Imperial Fleet, led a personal investigation into the disappearances. She took the fastest ship in the Navy and a crew of volunteers into the deep darkness. What she found there would change everything. The Void Singers were not a single species. They were a weapon, created by the architects millions of years ago to end a war that had threatened to destroy the galaxy. The weapon had succeeded beyond all expectations. It had ended the war by consuming both sides of the conflict. Then, with no more enemies to fight, it had turned on its creators. The architects had tried to stop the Void Singers. They had failed. Their entire civilization, spanning more worlds than any modern species could count, had been devoured in a matter of centuries. The Void Singers had then fallen into a deep sleep, their purpose fulfilled until humanity started using the gateways. Every time a ship passed through a gateway and to signal into the void, the signals were faint, easily overlooked by any normal technology. But the Void Singers were not normal. They had been designed to detect and respond to exactly these kinds of signals. Each journey through the network was like ringing a dinner bell for a predator that had not eaten in millions of years. Sarah returned to Earth with evidence of what was coming. She presented her findings to the Imperial Council, watching their faces shift from disbelief to horror to determination. "How long do we have?" Emperor Marcus asked. "Months. Maybe a year. The Void Singers are gathering, building their forces. When they have enough strength, they will attack. And based on what I found in the ruins of the architect civilization, no single species has ever survived their assault." The Emperor stood and walked to the window of his council chamber. Outside, the lights of New Geneva stretched to the horizon. Millions of people lived their lives without any knowledge of the threat approaching from the darkness. "Then we will not face them as a single species," Marcus said quietly. "We will face them together. Every species, every world, every ship and soldier and scientist in the galaxy." The call went out across the Galactic Council. For the first time in 100,000 years, every species united under a common banner. Fleets that had once been enemies gathered in formation. Scientists who had never shared their research began working together. Resources flowed between worlds that had barely acknowledged each other's existence. And at the center of it all stood humanity. Coordinating the greatest military effort in galactic history, the Void Singers attacked 6 months later. They emerged from the deep void in numbers beyond counting, a swarm of darkness that blotted out the stars. They consumed everything in their path, growing stronger with each world they devoured. The combined fleet met them at a system called Last Light. It's chosen because its star would be the last to fall if the line failed. Every species in the galaxy had sent ships. Trillions of souls waited in formation. Watching the darkness approach, Admiral Sarah Cole commanded from the bridge of the Imperial flagship. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. They knew the stakes. They knew that failure meant extinction for every living thing in the galaxy. All ships report ready. Her tactical officer announced. Sarah looked at the display showing the approaching Void Singer swarm. It was larger than any fleet ever assembled, a wave of destruction that had consumed civilizations beyond counting. But the fleet facing it was something new. Something the Void Singers had never encountered. Unity. "All ships engage," Sarah ordered. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Ships from 100 different species fought side by side, their weapons combining in patterns that no single civilization could have developed. Human tactics guided alien vessels. Alien technology enhanced human weapons. The whole became greater than the sum of its parts. The Void Singers were powerful, but they were also ancient. They had been designed to fight individual species, to exploit the divisions and rivalries that had always defined galactic politics. They did not know how to fight an enemy that acted as one. The battle lasted for 7 days. Worlds burned. Fleets were destroyed. Heroes rose and fell. Nathan Park, now impossibly old, gave his life to develop the weapon that would finally tip the balance. Rachel Bennett's granddaughter led the squadron that delivered it to the heart of the enemy fleet. On the 7th day, Sarah Cole fired the final shot. The weapon Nathan Park had created was based on the same technology the architects had used to build the Void Singers. It reversed the process, dissolving the connections that held the enemy together. The Void Singers began to collapse, their coordinated swarm becoming individual creatures that could be destroyed one by one. The cleanup took years. Scattered Void Singers had to be hunted down across thousands of star systems. Damaged worlds had to be rebuilt. The dead had to be mourned and remembered. But the galaxy survived. Emperor Marcus Cole died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 107, surrounded by his family and representatives from every species in the galaxy. His last words became humanity's motto, carved above the entrance to the Imperial Palace. We were exiled because they feared what we might become. Let us honor that fear by becoming something greater than anyone imagined. Not through conquest or domination, but through compassion and cooperation. We are humanity. We do not surrender. We do not forget. And we never stop reaching for tomorrow. The Terran Empire endured for 10,000 years after that day. It expanded beyond the galaxy, through gateways that led to places the architects had never explored. It welcomed species that had never seen a human face, and taught them the values that had been forged in the darkness of exile. At the heart of the Empire, on the world called Earth, a monument stood to remind future generations of how it all began. The monument showed a fleet of ships crossing into darkness, carrying the hopes of a species that had been cast out by those who feared them. The inscription below the monument was simple: from darkness, light; from exile, empire; from fear, friendship. This is who we are. This is who we chose to become. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the monument. They left gifts and prayers and promises. They stood in silence before the images of Daniel, Harper, and Catherine Cole, and Patricia, Webb, and all the others who had sacrificed everything so that their descendants could stand among the stars. And when they departed, they carried with them the most important lesson humanity had ever learned. The measure of a species was not in its power, or its technology, or its territory. It was in how they treated those who could not help them. It was in the mercy they showed to former enemies and the protection they offered to the weak. It was in the choice to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to hope rather than despair. Humanity had been cast into darkness and emerged as a light for the galaxy. Their legacy would shine forever among the stars, a reminder that even the smallest seed could grow into something magnificent if given the chance. The story of humanity's exile and triumph became the most told tale in galactic history. Children of 1,000 species grew up hearing about the people who had refused to surrender, who had built an empire from nothing, who had saved the galaxy when all hope seemed lost. And whenever anyone asked why humanity had become what it was, the answer was always the same: because that is what humans do. They survive. They adapt. They reach for the stars. And they never, ever give up.